talk a little bit here about another issue, another book that I read that was really influential in my life. It's a book called Resolved by Orrin Woodward. It actually has a longer title than that, but that's what you need to know. And actually, it's kind of ironic as I sit here making this video. If you can look back over my shoulder here, can't figure out which way I'm pointing, but back there is a picture of George Washington. And that's really at the core of what his book is about. It's an interesting concept. I just made another video here that I talked about a concept called the slight edge, and that's doing a little bit every day and the compounded effect that can have over the course of our lifetime in making us into the kind of person we want to be. Well, what's interesting, if you look at many of the greatest leaders that we've had in history, they've all pursued a course of making themselves better. And he uses in his book the example of three men from American history, and that's George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, and a guy that many of us have not heard of by the name of Jonathan Edwards. Both of these men, or all three of these men, achieved true greatness in the history of our nation and actually in the history of the world. And all three of them started out from rather plain circumstances. They weren't the people you would have expected to rise up and lead countries and make decisions that would affect the course of our country and other countries around the globe for hundreds of years. But they became that because they set out to better themselves every day and using that slight edge principle in their lives. And what's interesting is, in the case of all three of these men, a lot of us have heard about Ben Franklin and his story, where he started out, a very successful young man at different things, but ended up that his friends told him one day, says, "Ben, you're just flat out offensive." And and if you think about that, is I'm never going to get anywhere in life if I come across as offensive even to the people I'm supposed to like. And what it did was it shocked him to the point that he set out in his life to make himself a better man. And he did so by going out and evaluating his weaknesses and then writing out a statement that this is what I'm going to become. That's the counter opposite of that weakness. I'm going to develop a strength in that area. So if I'm offensive, I'm going to become very easy to get along with. If I am a real wasteful spender, I'm going to become a disciplined, budgeting, spending person. I'm going to become, any of a dozen other things. He had about 13 different resolutions that he had there. And he set out over the course of his life to not only read those to himself on a frequent basis, but he'd pick out one of them and work for it at a week at a time or a month at a time. So that he was constantly rotating through those things and working at developing new habits in each one of those resolutions that he made. George Washington actually did something very similar in his life. And I can't remember the number, but it seemed like he actually wrote down a fairly large number of statements of the way a gentleman should behave. And he set out and he made it a point to read those at least once a week throughout his life. And over the course of his life, we know what an amazing man George Washington became. Jonathan Edwards did likewise, did a similar thing with his life and had similar results. Orrin's books, it's vastly interesting because he lays out what his 13 resolutions would be and then writes significantly a chapter on each one of them. And there's some very instructive and very thought-provoking material in that book. And I would encourage you to get that and read it. It's available through our website and through the stuff that we do. So I'm not going to really get into his book. Well, what I want to get into is this concept that we can, by working on ourselves, go out and make ourselves into the kind of people who we want to be, who we can be proud of, who, because of who we've become, we can have great relationships in our lives, especially with the people who are most important to us. But not only that, by developing ourselves, we become the kind of people who other people want to follow, and who we can influence others because they've seen us develop ourselves into a person who's worth following. And that's just a concept that I think is vastly important for us, because so many of us want to really default back into that mode of, that's just the way I am, that's who I am, I don't want to change, I don't need to change, change is too hard, all of those kind of things. But we can see by the actions of these individuals that this concept of developing resolutions for ourselves and developing a plan of action that we're going to follow through with can really take us and help us to become a much better person. Orrin Woodward and Chris Brady, a friend of his, actually wrote another book several years ago that's called Launching a Leadership Revolution, which actually ties right into this. And they talk about leadership being the influence of other people, and that they have 5 different steps for leadership development in there. But one of the core concepts that they teach is something they call the trilateral leadership ledger. And the value of that is that it talks about having 3 specific areas in our lives that we have to work on before other people are going to be anywhere interested in following us. And those 3 areas fall right along with these resolutions that these 3 men made. And they are that we have to work on our character and our task, or our ability to perform tasks and pursue tasks, and our strength in relationships with other people. And an interesting way of developing for them to decide how that really falls in your life is they suggest that we score ourselves on a scale of 1 to 10 in each of those categories: character, task, and relationship. And then you take those 3 scores, maybe it's a 2 and a 4 and a 5, and you multiply those numbers together, and that'll come out with a total on a scale of 1 to 1,000. And they say then, depending on where you fall on that scale, that tells you where you're at in your leadership capabilities. And so if you have a 2 and 1, and you have a 4 and another one, 2 times 4 is 8, and you've got a 5 and another one, 8 times 5 is 40, that gives you a score of 40 on that. And look at where you're at there compared to your potential. Now, the interesting thing I really love that they teach is a lot of people will tell us that just work on your strengths and try to ignore your weaknesses. But their key point here is, if you score a 0 in any one of those 3 categories, look what that does to your total score. Because 0 times whatever your score is in the other categories gives you a score of a big fat 0 on your ability to lead people. And by simply exercising enough effort to bring your weakest thing up to a 1, you actually get yourself on the chart to some degree or another. And it really represents to us that we can hold ourselves back from our ability to influence other people if we haven't developed relationship skills, if we are not good at doing the work required to be out in front and get results, and if we've got poor character. And any of those things can be improved, and all of them need to be worked on. Character is a good example, because we might look at ourselves and go, you know what, I've blown it so many times in the past, I've just given up on being a man of character. You go through things, you'll find yourself at some point in your life going, wow, I slipped up right there and exercised a real lack of character in that issue. Well, does that mean that you're done? That you're sentenced to being a person with no character for the rest of your life? I believe the answer to that's no. Now, it doesn't mean that you can start demanding trust from people just because you said, I'm going to fix that. But it does mean that you can start that slight edge thing at that point and say, my resolution from this point on is to start building my character again. I'm going to fix that place that I was weak at, and I'm not going to let that happen again in my life. And so over the course of time, you can build your character back to where you can earn the trust of people who could or should be following you. And when you do that, then you've reestablished that piece of your overall leadership ability. And I think the same thing falls true in any one of those three categories. You know, if you come to a period in your life where you become a lazy bum or whatever, then it doesn't have to stay that way. You can say, you know what, I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to go out and I'm going to find something to do. I don't care if it even pays me money. I'm going to go do something that's beneficial to this world that I'm in. And when you start doing that, you start again building that slight edge of your character, or of your, yeah, it's your character related too, but of your ability to pursue a task in your life. So we have plenty of things that all fit into that category, but it all goes back to the point that we can work on fixing ourselves. So that's my challenge to you. Let's start that process. See ya.